there, gang. It has been decided that this video should have its opening narration in the voice of Werner Herzog. The patient this week is an old parlor guitar made by Washburn in the 19-teens or 20s. Washburn, of course, was a subsidiary brand of Lyon and Healy, which started in the late 1880s under the name George Washburn Company, those being the first and second names of George Lyon himself. They had to make it convoluted. It became a very respected brand, maybe second only to Martin guitars. This is a typical parlor guitar of the period, designed probably with gut strings in mind. Gut being a visceral substance, it is poignant to imagine the delicate sounds of yesteryear. Ephemeral joy and celebration now lay silent and broken, completely forgotten and unrecorded. Others find the weathered varnish and tarnished brass a charming dictation of time's passing, but I am reminded that the instrument itself is only a dispassionate assemblage of uncaring wood and wire, its gaping sound hole an allegory for the void itself, and within lies only darkness and lint. Okay, thank you for humoring me. I've wanted to do that for a while. This is maybe a step up from the last few parlor guitars we've documented here. This is another oak guitar, but I think this one is actually made of oak this time, rather than the faux finished grain embossed onto poplar, which we've seen. I'm saying that because there are matching medullary rays showing on the interior surface that match the ones on the outside. Unfortunately, this guy has seen some extra tension. I'm willing to bet. Put those honkin' big 13s on it for a few decades and see what happens. Not only is the action high, there's some significant deforming going on in the area of the sound hole. And the heavy strings probably also tore off the original bridge. It's been replaced with what seems to be a harmony bridge from the 50s instead. This is a much bigger footprint, probably too big for a guitar this narrow, this size. It just looks at odds with the style and everything. It's anachronistic. It's just wrong. And the fingerboard has been removed and re-glued at some point. Not quite in alignment. This is not an easy thing to do with these boards because they're so very thin. And they tend to warp as soon as they're removed because there's only like a millimeter between the bottom of the frets and the bottom of the board. There's usually a lot of latent tension in there. So they do funny things. Trying to reinstall it onto the neck, which is folded upwards where it meets the body, has resulted in insurmountable waviness. Yeah, that's not going away. You can't plane that out. So this board, it's not worth trying to save. We're going to put a new one on there. There are areas where the binding has peeled off, and maybe the back as well. Actually, this tape looks like it might be antique as well, because it's yellowed in a way that seems to say I was put on in the early 1980s. So what I'm saying is we've got another one that needs everything. There's a whole lot of work to be done here. And the goal is to make this thing an actual playing instrument rather than a wall hanger. So some modifications are going to take place. It's not going to be exactly like it was when it left the factory in 1918 or something. Okay, before we take the strings off, we'll do a quick check here. Yeah, so the projected neck angle from the top of the frets ends up somewhere below the bridge, which isn't a good thing. You know, we'd want it to be somewhere up around here. So the teeter has really tottered. Another thing I want to do is check out the actual string spacing at the bridge. Here, I think it's, it's not too bad. This board ended up towards the bass side a bit. It really should have come more towards the treble. It's overhanging the bass side. But that aside, I think the actual spacing is not too bad. We could reuse that. From the center of the outside strings, that's about 54 millimeters. Which would be approximately 2 3/16-ish, which is pretty standard. That's not bad. We'll reuse that. just for giggles, the action, as it presents, is a full 1/4 of an inch. That is 250 thousandths, 16/64ths, 6.35 millimeters. Can't imagine it being worse, actually. Looking at this board, I think it's probably ebonized maple again, which is maple that would have been roasted and then dyed black. Time is not a friend to these guys. They get so many cracks, they become so brittle that removing them and then trying to put them back on again, it's not worth it. Be better off just to make a new board, which is what we're going to do. This old Harmony bridge is not in bad shape, all things considered, so we can try and save it for use on some other project. It's Brazilian rosewood after all, so I'm just going to put a little water on this while my soldering iron heats up, and we'll steam these out, because this actually does have screws through the soundboard. And you call them steamed hams even though they're obviously grilled. Oh, she's a tight one. While the bridge heats up, let's have another look at this fingerboard here. You can see the state of it. That's why I say it's not a big deal for this one to go away. There are what seem to be ghost marks from the previous bridge on here. We may be limited by the extent of the previous damage, which is pretty significant. Looks like the strings chewed all the way through to what would be close to the front of the bridge somehow. Don't quite know how that happened. Regardless, we will make something to cover that up. Ordinarily, at this point, I would make the new bridge and install that before moving on to the neck and that kind of stuff. But in this case, I think I'm going to pull off the fingerboard and take the neck off and basically do the total disassembly, because I want to see if I can shore up some of this stuff that's going on in the upper bout, which might change things a little bit in terms of the geometry. I've taken a measurement for the theoretical scale length, which is like 614 millimeters. So, you know, there might be a millimeter or two change in position once I've actually pushed this thing back into relative flatness. So I'm going to do this stuff first before I do that. There's that pancake smell again from the roasted maple. This has been glued together with regular woodworking glue. See, the underside of the fretboard is just splintering away. Delightful. Just turning into a powder. The dyes used in these things were acidic, and over time it changes. It doesn't feel like wood anymore. It's almost like an oatmeal cookie. So it's breaking off at the line of every fret and leaving considerable material behind, which I don't really care too much about because I'm going to be sanding this flat anyway. But this is, yeah, nasty stuff. I'll start squaring up a bridge blank and plane it to thickness. I'll mark out the position for the string holes. I've decided to make another bridge with the truncated semi-pyramidal wings because it's of the period and it looks good and it's kind of fun to make. So here I'm cutting the trough in between the wing and the main body of the bridge using a Forstner bit, and I'm just sort of holding that block of wood there to provide a little axial pressure on the bit because it kind of wants to kick away from its intended path due to the fact that the spur isn't making complete contact with the wood. That just keeps it right in the pocket, like Bernard Purdie. I'm going to plane a slight taper into the top of the bridge, sloping towards the treble side, about a millimeter or so. Then I'll reduce the thickness of the wings using the oscillating spindle sander. I'm careful. I'm not going to put my thumb in there. I just refuse. Here's my jig for cutting a slope into the wings of the bridge. I'll use a piece of veneer here as a spacer. Get that clamped in there. I'll take light passes with a bearing guided bit, keeping fingers well away. Then I'll route the ends in the same way. I've actually got the bridge blank super glued in place with masking tape between, because this is difficult to clamp. I'll ease the corners on the main portion of the bridge. I find that if I want to keep things square and straight, sometimes a file is more accurate than sanding. I'm not going to put oil on the top surface here because I use a piece of tape to help plot out the intonation line for cutting the saddle slot. So the oil here is mostly to act as a resist when I glue this onto the top. It just makes cleaning up glue squeeze out easier. And I've protected the bottom surface with a layer of packing tape so the oil doesn't seep in there. Okay, let this sit for a minute or two, then I'll wipe off any excess. Come back in a couple of hours and put on another coat. The area around here is quite undulating, as you might expect, but it's almost like it's a trough in which the fingerboard was sitting. You know, there are definite margins on either side, like a hump. Not the easiest thing to work around. Basically, I want to remove this dovetail, and I'm trying to get enough sludge out of the way where I can actually see it. This area, of course, was glued from the top on 2 occasions. One at the factory, and then again when the fingerboard was glued back down. So there's a lot of glue. So much that there may not be a space in between the end of the dovetail and the front of the pocket, which is kind of unfortunate. Well, maybe not. Oh, okay, yeah. There's a hairline. Because it's really nasty when the front of the dovetail is glued to the front of the neck block. There's a lot of surface area there to overcome, and we're trying to push the neck up out of the pocket. So if this is free, that's a good thing. I'll drill some holes for the heat probes. Sometimes the drill bit will get all clogged up with glue residue and it has to be cleaned off. I'll pop that into the removal jig. This is a small-bodied guitar. If it was any smaller, I'd have to drill more holes. Hotwirefoamfactory.com. Foam cutters, 6-inch, DC power supply. Good to go. Got to be careful with how vigorous you do this wiggling thing. If something is still glued up and you do this, you could possibly break a portion of the dovetail or something. I can tell this is loose enough now that I can remove the probes and put a little bit more pressure from the heel cap screw. A pretty gooey one. Yeah, I don't think I'm the first person to take this neck off. there is a hole that's been drilled in the corner here, which extends down. It's got darkening around it as if it was a steel needle, or could be a heat stick. But the glue that was used is woodworking glue. This is not hide glue. So yeah, not the first party. Here's a shot of the transverse brace in the region of the bridge, which kind of functioned as a bridge pad, as you can see. Not quite. It's kind of amazing how often this brace is mispositioned in old guitars. I've seen this a lot. It's baffling. Anyway, it's all cracked and non-functional, so it's got to go. I'm using this bent over palette knife to pry from behind. These holes have glue in them, probably from putting on the bridge. It's a very gooey, non-crispy sort of white glue, very rubbery in consistency. I'm going to size these up incrementally using drill bits, using them backwards. I cut some plugs with my 1/4 inch tapered plug cutter. I'm just using the reamer to refine the fit. These are going to extend down a little bit below the surface of the soundboard on the inside, so that's why I had to remove the brace first before doing the plugging. Otherwise this could have complicated matters. This transverse brace here, I think it's made of poplar. And it's kind of interesting in that it tapers. This is reversed from the way it would be installed inside the guitar because it's upside down. But on the treble side it's about 1 inch or 25 millimeters, tapering to 3/4 of an inch, like 18 or 19 millimeters on the bass side. So, you know, is that intentional? Is that a design element? Maybe, I don't know. And it seems to be about 1/8 of an inch thick, just over 3 millimeters. Yeah. So I have to replace it with something, and it's going to have a maple component. A couple of ways to do this. I've seen guitars like this where this brace was spruce, and in cases where we've gone from like a tailpiece guitar to having bridge pins, I will usually just put a very thin slip of maple over top to act as a bridge pad. So I could make the whole thing out of spruce with a maple pad, or I could make a maple brace. But I don't know, that's a little bit of extra weight. Yeah, I think I'll make a spruce brace with a maple pad. Slightly wider than this. It's going to be like 1 inch all the way across. I've got a nice offcut of spruce soundboard here. I'll score both sides, crack it off, and then plane it flat and straight and true. This is a bench hook designed for planing extremely thin materials. So I have to apply a little downward pressure with my hand while I'm planing. Unorthodox, but it works. Okay, I've made these transverse braces up. This one that goes in the upper bout, I think this is really important for any guitar that's going to have steel strings. And actually most classical guitars will have something supporting things up here as well. Leave it out at your peril. There are people who will go in and actually pull these out of Martin guitars. They're colloquially known as the popsicle stick, ostensibly to improve the tone. There's a reason it's in the design, you know. This area above the sound hole has very little input in terms of sound production, but it's very important structurally. So this is, you know, this is going to help straighten this part of the guitar out a bit. I still have more patchwork to do on the pinholes and stuff back here, but this will get glued in as well. It's got a maple strip which will be glued to this spruce brace. And we will return to all of this next week. We'll make a fingerboard, we'll do some inlay on that, fret it, put some carbon fiber in the neck, we'll attach the bridge, we'll reset the neck, we'll do the crack repairs in the back and the binding, and lots more work to do. Until then, please practice your Werner Herzog impersonations, and I will see you then. Thanks for watching.